Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for a high-stakes journey back to 2009. We're navigating the inner turmoil of the newly minted Obama administration
Right.
as it wrestled with two inherited brutal conflicts. The wars in Afghanistan and Pakistan, a theater of operations the White House would soon rebrand as AFPAC.
And this deep dive is built on a pretty extraordinary stack of sources. We're talking transcripts, internal notes, memoirs, things that really capture the sheer intensity of that transition.
Yeah.
And these weren't just, standard policy challenges. For the incoming team, they felt like existential threats.
That's right. Our source material takes us right inside the Situation Room, where a new president, who was, let's be honest, largely unfamiliar with the mechanics and secrecy of the intelligence community, was handed an immediate operational mandate. So our mission today is to dissect how those early, often overwhelming intelligence briefings fundamentally shaped the strategy or, the lack thereof.
And how those civil-military tensions just immediately flared up.
Right. As the administration tried to define what winning even meant in a theater that had been neglected for years.
And we are really zeroing in on the immense pressure placed on President Obama. After he got his first comprehensive intelligence handoff, he told one of his closest advisors he felt he had inherited a world that could blow up any minute in half a dozen ways.
That quote just says it all, doesn't it?
It perfectly encapsulates the sheer weight of information overload and the risk he was facing from literally day one.
And that pressure started before Inauguration Day, delivered under this cloak of really intense secrecy. So let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the secrecy surrounding this transfer of power.
Yeah.
President-elect Obama gets his first major intelligence briefing. This is December 2008.
Yeah.
And the setting was the austere Klichinsky Federal Building in Chicago. The Director of National Intelligence, Mike McConnell, and CIA briefer Michael Morrell arrive, but the protocol immediately causes friction.
It's immediately tense. And what's crucial here is the sheer level of mistrust coming from the outgoing administration of George W. Bush.
Right.
McConnell had rigid, strict instructions, and they came directly from the president. So when two senior Obama transition members, John Podesta and James Steinberg, greeted McConnell and said, "Hey, we'll be sitting in on the briefing."
And these guys weren't rookies. They both had high-level, all-source intelligence access from their time in the Clinton administration.
Exactly. But McConnell had to awkwardly refuse them entry.
Just flat out no.
Flat out no. Bush's instructions were absolute. Only the president-elect and his designated national security cabinet members could attend. No tourists, and he said, certainly no professors.
Wow, that sounds like a direct slap at the civilian political class.
Oh, it absolutely was. Bush was terrified that if former officials like Podesta or Steinberg heard the most sensitive secrets, we're talking the identities of human spies, new techniques for fighting al-Qaeda, the so-called sources and methods.
The real crown jewel.
The crown jewels. He feared they might reveal the spies in a speech, a book, or a careless comment. So for Bush, protecting those assets just completely outweighed any political niceties. It was a moment of secrecy that, immediately caused irritation within the incoming team. They felt frozen out.
So, okay, once that initial political hurdle was cleared, the content of the briefing itself was, terrifying. And it didn't even start with Afghanistan.
No, not at all. It started with the biggest flashpoint in the region. The India-Pakistan fuse.
The nuclear fuse.
The nuclear fuse. McConnell stressed that the single best way out of the current quagmire in Afghanistan was not to send more troops to Kabul. It was to broker some kind of lasting peace between India and Pakistan.
And what was the logic there?
Well, the logic is critical. Pakistan's deep, almost existential security paranoia is all directed at India.
Right.
So if Pakistan felt significantly more secure in its relationship with its neighbor, it might, and this is a big might, stop playing its deadly game with the Taliban.
And that deadly game, of course, meant active complicity from Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI. They were essentially double-dealing the U.S. while taking billions in aid. How did McConnell even frame that level of institutional betrayal to a new president?
He had intelligence that left absolutely no room for doubt. He presented evidence, both human and technical, showing multiple communications between an ISI colonel and Siraj Haqqani, a very powerful guerrilla commander allied with the Afghan Taliban.
So it's not just a rogue agent. This is institutional.
It's institutional. And the betrayal didn't stop at just talking. The intel proved that the ISI had actively helped the Haqqani network attack the Indian embassy in Kabul just 4 months prior.
Killing 58 people.
58 people. The intelligence community was essentially telling Obama that the regional partner you absolutely need for success is actively undercutting U.S. goals and funding mass murder.
Okay, so here's where the strategic problem gets immediately interesting and geographically constrained. They identified the center of gravity of the entire insurgency as the Quetta Shura Taliban, or QST.
Right, led by the elusive Mullah Muhammad Omar, who had a $25 million reward on his head.
And the intelligence pointed with high confidence to the QST as the absolute center of gravity. This was the brain directing all the operations.
It's the brain of the snake.
So where was this brain located?
Quetta, Pakistan, a major, densely populated city of nearly 1 million people, just 60 miles from the Afghan border.
That's a huge problem.
It's a massive problem.
Yeah.
And McConnell had to explain the agonizing truth. Drone strikes were virtually impossible there. The rules of engagement, even under Bush, could not justify the massive, certain civilian casualties that a strike in a dense urban center like Quetta would entail.
So the U.S. couldn't strike the leader,
Right.
and they couldn't send ground troops in without
risking an all-out war with a nuclear power.
Right. Meanwhile, the CIA was already running this massive, highly clandestine paramilitary operation in Afghanistan that needed presidential sign-off.
And this was a huge revelation for the incoming team. The existence of this highly secret 3,000-man covert army in Afghanistan, known as the Counterterrorism Pursuit Teams, or CTPT.
3,000 men.
3,000, mostly Afghan paramilitary forces, but they were trained, paid, and directed by the CIA, operating far outside the conventional military chain of command. They were authorized by Bush for direct action killing, capturing insurgents, pacifying tribal areas.
So that is essentially a standing covert army operating parallel to the actual military. What was their specific operational role that differentiated them from, say, Army Special Forces?
The CTPT was designed for maximum deniability and speed. They worked in regions where conventional forces just couldn't operate or lacked the necessary local knowledge. Their mandate was pure counterterrorism, high-value targets, and maintaining relationships with tribal leaders that the military couldn't touch because of their larger presence and profile.
This was the kind of stuff Bush didn't want the tourists knowing about.
Exactly. The existence of America's own secret, locally embedded army inside a combat zone.
And McConnell wasn't done with the grim news. He then moved far beyond kinetic warfare into the terrifying possibilities of the cyber realm. He started detailing the NSA's capabilities.
Yeah, he explained that the NSA was capable of more than just traditional intelligence, reading communications and listening. He detailed the existence of this highly secret offensive capability known as computer network attack, or CNA.
Offensive hacking?
The most sophisticated form of stealth hacking, run through a dedicated military unit, the Army Network Warfare Battalion. The fact that the U.S. had this offensive weapon was a secret of the highest order.
But the real chilling detail, I think, was the vulnerability he exposed regarding the U.S. financial system. This wasn't hypothetical.
No, this was a national security vulnerability on par with 9/11. He painted a picture of economic Armageddon. He argued that if the 9/11 terrorists had been cyber smart and attacked a single major financial clearinghouse,
like the Bank of New York or Citibank.
Right, which processes an unimaginable $3 trillion in transactions daily.
$3 trillion a day.
He said the economic disruption would have been an order of magnitude greater than the physical collapse of the 2 World Trade Center towers.
That shifts the entire definition of vulnerability, doesn't it? It's not just about physical infrastructure. It's about confidence in digital entries. If you destroy the digital ledger, you destroy the illusion of wealth.
You destroy the global economy instantly. McConnell was blunt. He said there were no real protections and the system was totally open to attack. This wasn't some future threat for 2015. This was an immediate structural vulnerability in 2008.
So Obama's being told he's inheriting this world of simultaneous threats. A regional nuclear flashpoint, an intractable insurgency operating from a neighbor's sanctuary, and total economic fragility.
Right.
His reaction is completely understandable then. To be handed that kind of brief right before taking the oath. He later told an advisor, "I'm inheriting a world that could blow up any minute in half a dozen ways, and I will have some powerful but limited and perhaps even dubious tools to keep it from happening."
And that phrase, dubious tools, that's the key. The transition didn't just hand him wars. It handed him this profound sense of fragility and complexity, where the military solutions offered didn't address the core problems in Pakistan or the hidden threats in cyberspace.
He felt boxed in before he even moved into the Oval Office.
Completely.
Okay, with that apocalyptic briefing just hanging in the air, Obama had to assemble his team. A team of rivals, as you might call it. And the decisions were deeply fraught with political and personal drama.
Oh, yeah.
Starting with the retention of a Republican, Robert Gates, as Secretary of Defense.
Retaining Gates was a political masterstroke, for signaling continuity, especially during two ongoing wars. But Gates's own secret motivation for staying was a profound critique of the very military structure he was leading.
What was that critique? Why would an experienced SecDef agree to stay on with a new opposing administration?
He told people he had become shocked by the culture at the Pentagon. Gates felt the military leadership, the senior brass, was engaged in an ugly parody.
A parody?
Yes. They were obsessed with future technologies, designing and buying equipment for the wars of 2015 or 2020, while simultaneously, in his words, ignoring the wars of 2008.
Wow.
He saw a systemic arrogance and a disregard for the troops who were currently in the field, fighting messy counterinsurgency campaigns with totally inadequate resources and doctrine.
So his motivation wasn't political at all. It was a desperate internal reform effort. He was determined to force the military establishment to stop looking 5 years ahead and focus on the current bloody reality.
That's exactly it. He stayed primarily because he saw himself as the only one who could successfully shift the massive bureaucratic inertia of the Defense Department back toward the immediate needs of the soldiers fighting the wars they had, not the wars they wanted.
And then you had the political operators defining the White House command structure.
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel, chosen as chief of staff, known for his profanity, his combustible nature, and just this driving impatience.
Emanuel's personal drive was crucial. He viewed his career as a constant, dangerous high-wire act. He was driven by an almost pathological fear of failure.
Right. So his appointment signaled an intensely centralized, politically aggressive White House that prioritized speed and results, even if it cost them internal harmony. He was there to enforce presidential priorities quickly and ruthlessly.
And, of course, the appointment of the former rival, Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State. She was deeply skeptical of the offer at first.
She was. She initially viewed the offer, after that brutal primary battle, as a mere bullshit political kabuki dance.
I can imagine.
It was only when John Podesta framed the challenge in almost generational terms, he told her, "Bush fucked up the world," that she was convinced. The sheer scale of the challenge required her political clout and her global visibility. It wasn't about the severity of the crisis she was being asked to help solve.
This clash of ambition and ego was particularly evident during the CIA transition. The outgoing director, Michael Hayden, who was kind of the Bush administration's institutional memory.
He was insulting.
He was insulted to learn of his replacement, Leon Panetta, from reading the newspaper. Yeah, Hayden saw Panetta, who was a former congressman and Clinton chief of staff, as Rahm Emanuel's political appointee, his Goomba.
His Goomba, right.
And this professional insult led Hayden to try and orchestrate a dramatic oh shit moment during his final briefing with Obama in December 2008.
So what was Hayden trying to sell during that meeting? Was he just trying to scare the new president, or was he trying to preserve certain covert programs?
It was both. He presented this massive chart listing 14 highly classified covert actions. He detailed the operations against Iran's nuclear program and the explosive growth of drone use in Pakistan. 80% of all worldwide drone attacks were happening there.
80%.
And crucially, he spoke very confidently about making a sale on reduced interrogation programs. He was trying to convince Obama that the continued existence of some coercive techniques, even if they were greatly limited, was essential. He even claimed the CIA owned certain foreign intelligence services, like the Jordanians, because of massive financial investment.
That had to be a tough pitch for Obama, who had explicitly promised to abolish those very techniques on the campaign trail.
Hayden thought his expertise and the gravity of the threats would win out. He was convinced that the new president would realize he needed the CIA's tools. But the internal judgment was that he just completely misread the room. Outgoing DNI McConnell watched Hayden deliver his presentation and concluded he was cocky and had misread the audience. And he was right. Obama later abolished the CIA's enhanced interrogation program entirely. He restricted them strictly to the techniques laid out in the Army Field Manual.
And the briefing Hayden gave his successor, Panetta, revealed the shocking scope of what a CIA director's role had become in the modern era.
Oh, absolutely. Hayden laid out 3 key points to Panetta. He said, number 1, Leon, don't know if you expect this, but you are the nation's combatant commander in the global war on terrorism.
That's a stunning declaration.
It is. Panetta wasn't just an analyst. He would be running the drone strikes, the entire CTPT covert army in Afghanistan, and operations in 80 other countries. And the final piece of advice, which is almost darkly humorous, was don't ever use the words CIA and torture in the same paragraph again.
Wow.
It just shows the immense operational and political tightrope that Panetta was inheriting.
So, shifting focus now to the military doctrine that was shaping this entire debate.
Yeah.
We have General David Petraeus, the intellectual architect of counterinsurgency, or COIN. This doctrine would define the troop debate for the next year.
Petraeus, having successfully implemented the surge in Iraq, was the father of modern counterinsurgency. His philosophy, which he enshrined in the Counterinsurgency Field Manual, was simple but incredibly demanding.
And what was that core philosophy?
That the U.S. cannot kill its way out of the war. Success meant protecting and winning over the population to create stable, legitimate governance that would then push out the insurgents.
That doctrine completely redefines the job of a soldier. What exactly did COIN require of the troops on the ground?
It was a massive departure from traditional combat. The COIN soldier, according to Petraeus, had to be a social worker, urban planner, anthropologist, and psychologist.
All of those things.
All of them. The military had to be patient, live among the population, minimize casualties, and focus on infrastructure and the rule of law. The idea was, if the population saw the U.S. as protectors rather than invaders, they would eventually side with the government.
But when Petraeus actually visited Afghanistan, he saw a huge disconnect between that COIN ideal and the brutal reality of what he called the forgotten war.
He was horrified. He found severe training problems with the Afghan security forces, which were supposed to be the key to the COIN strategy's eventual success. He looked at the Afghan police training schedule and realized there was no time on the shooting range.
No range time for the police.
The training was so basic and rushed. He famously concluded it was almost daycare, not serious preparation for combat. And this led him to an early pre-strategy review conclusion. Without significantly more resources and attention, we're not going to achieve our objectives. The doctrine demanded resources that Afghanistan just wasn't getting.
So, the COIN doctrine hinges on winning over the population by offering better governance than the Taliban.
Right.
But the reality on the ground was immediate and pervasive corruption, and it was emanating from the very top. The biggest operational obstacle wasn't the Taliban. It was President Hamid Karzai's half-brother, Ahmed Wali Karzai.
Ahmed Wali Karzai was a massive walking contradiction to the entire COIN mission. He effectively ran Kandahar like a feudal warlord, or as one source put it, an Afghan version of New York City's infamous Boss Tweed.
So the corruption wasn't just petty graft.
No, it was deeply systemic. He controlled everything from local security contracts to smuggling routes.
And the most astonishing part of this whole situation is that the U.S. was essentially subsidizing its own destabilization by employing the chief perpetrator.
That is the ultimate structural irony, the ultimate betrayal. Ahmed Wali Karzai had been on the U.S. and CIA payroll for years, beginning even before 9/11. He was a paid agent, an informant, a political asset.
So he was our guy?
He was our guy.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he was the landlord for some critical CIA and military facilities in Kandahar, collecting hefty rents on properties he arguably didn't even own. There was also strong evidence he was profiting immensely from the opium trade. The U.S. was financially intertwined with the very corruption it was supposedly fighting to eliminate.
This forced the U.S. into an untenable position. How do you demand good governance and rule of law from a partner whose family you are financially dependent on for operational security?
You can't. It was paralyzing. And the hypocrisy was visible to the average Afghan, which completely undermined the COIN narrative. The U.S. could launch a massive campaign to clear an area, but as soon as the U.S. presence moved on, the corrupt local authorities, often tied to the Karzai family, moved right back in, alienating the local population and driving them back into the arms of the Taliban.
And this tension spilled over publicly when Senator Lindsey Graham confronted President Karzai over his demands and his public complaints about civilian casualties.
Graham was absolutely blunt, reflecting the deep frustration in Washington. Karzai often publicly blamed every bad act on the Americans, often just parroting Taliban press releases about civilian casualties.
Right.
So Graham told him point blank he was feeding the enemy with this behavior. He also challenged Karzai's demand for new rules of engagement, specifically requiring a warrant before a raid, pointing out that this was just absurd in an active war zone. The message was clear. The U.S. is making massive sacrifices, and you are simultaneously undermining the effort for your own political gain.
So against this backdrop, President Obama launches the Rapid AfPak Strategy Review, led by Bruce Riedel, a move that surprised insiders by its speed and its scope.
Riedel was tasked with producing a massive, thorough review in just 60 days. And the central, unavoidable finding of that review fundamentally changed the lens through which the U.S. viewed the conflict.
What was that central finding?
The U.S. had to shift its focus away from solely Afghanistan to Pakistan. It had to confront the region as AfPak, two countries, one single challenge. Success in Afghanistan was just impossible until the safe haven problem in Pakistan was resolved.
That conceptual shift from Afghanistan to AfPak, that was massive, wasn't it? It was an acknowledgement of the core structural problem.
It was a necessary recognition of reality. The review showed definitively that extremists based in Pakistan, the ISI-backed Haqqanis and the Quetta-Shura Taliban, were actively and fundamentally undermining Afghanistan, making any progress there temporary and, ultimately reversible.
Riedel's findings were so serious that Rahm Emanuel made sure the president didn't just read the 44-page report. Riedel had to walk him through it personally on Air Force One.
And during that flight, Riedel delivered a chilling strategic warning. He confessed to Obama that after reviewing all the intelligence, he found he had underestimated the danger during the campaign. He said al-Qaeda was more dangerous than it was on September 10, 2001.
More dangerous.
More dangerous. And he cautioned that drone strikes alone were purely tactical. He compared them to going after a beehive, one bee at a time. They could kill a few workers, but they weren't going to destroy the hive, which was located securely in Pakistan.
He also presented a stark financial asymmetry that should have dictated the long-term strategy.
The cost difference was just staggering, and it was crucial for sustainability. To put an American soldier on the ground, and this accounts for everything, training, logistics, pay, veteran benefits, it costs roughly $250,000 annually. An Afghan soldier, by contrast, cost roughly $12,000. This data just screamed that the long-term goal had to be transferring responsibility to competent, committed local forces, even if the U.S. had to foot the bill.
But the real urgency and the source of strategic paralysis came from Riedel's three bad things. The absolute worst-case scenarios emanating from Pakistan, a nuclear power.
These were the nightmares that kept the White House up at night. First, another attack on the U.S. homeland traceable to Pakistan. And the retribution plan, which Obama was now privy to, involved bombing over 150 sites inside Pakistan.
Which would be an act of war.
A plan fraught with catastrophic escalation risk. Second, a jihadist government takes over Pakistan, meaning a nuclear-armed state falls into the hands of extremists. And third, Pakistan attacks India again, potentially leading to nuclear war, crossing that threshold of restraint that India had maintained after the Mumbai attacks.
And the ultimate, most sobering conclusion Riedel presented about Pakistan's strategic direction suggested the U.S. was investing blood and treasure into a problem that might not even be fixable.
He stated it bluntly. He said changing Pakistan's strategic direction, forcing them to stop using extremist proxies against India, may take 2 decades. It may not be possible.
Wow.
This was an extraordinary and chilling prospect. A president being asked to commit massive resources to a conflict where the core engine of the insurgency was operating from an untouchable sanctuary dictated by regional rivalries that had existed for centuries.
So Obama had a strategy review that said the core strategic problem was Pakistan.
Right.
Yet the immediate military solution being demanded was a massive troop surge for Afghanistan. That structural contradiction sets us up perfectly for the great debate, COIN versus CT+.
That contradiction was the engine of all the civil-military friction. The generals, focused on Afghanistan, had a plan based on protecting the population, while the civilians, focused on Pakistan and political sustainability, argued for a much lighter footprint.
General Stanley McChrystal, the new commander, immediately sent a classified 66-page assessment to Washington that created a sense of desperate urgency and strategically put pressure on the White House to act.
McChrystal's assessment was a political and operational hand grenade. His key warning was precise. Failure to gain the initiative and reverse insurgent momentum in the near term, next 12 months, risks an outcome where defeating the insurgency is no longer possible.
So he put a clock on it.
He put a clock on it. This meant the U.S. could lose the war by September 2010. That created massive political leverage for the military's troop request.
And he didn't shy away from blaming the existing conditions either, right? He confirmed the corruption problem, noting that the military was poorly configured for protecting the population.
Exactly, and that corruption, combined with ISAF's own tactical errors, had given Afghans little reason to support their government. And he paired that dire urgency with a specific number. He privately communicated to Gates that he needed 40,000 more troops.
Really?
40,000. And the military consensus, backed by figures like Petraeus and Mullen, was unwavering. A fully resourced, comprehensive counterinsurgency campaign was the only way to save the mission. If Obama provided anything less than what McChrystal requested, the generals could later argue that the war was unsuccessful due to insufficient resources.
But wait a minute. The demand for 40,000 troops had to bring up historical parallels? Gates, the Soviet specialist, must have had an immediate, visceral reaction to that number.
Oh, absolutely. Gates was shocked. He instantly recalled the Soviet experience in Afghanistan, noting the Soviets had used 110,000 troops and failed ruthlessly, despite having no restraints on their brutality. Asking for 40,000 felt like a path to the same political and military quagmire.
Okay, now let's turn to the opposition, Vice President Joe Biden, who countered the coin philosophy with his Counterterrorism Plus argument, or CT Plus. This wasn't just a cost-cutting measure, this was a philosophical rejection of nation-building.
Biden's alternative, which he developed intensely over 5 hours with his team, was rooted in pragmatism and historical skepticism. His plan focused on counterterrorism killing or capturing high-value targets, these decapitation strikes, plus robust training and partnership with Afghan security forces.
And his argument was that this was cheaper and more sustainable.
Significantly cheaper, politically sustainable for the necessary duration, and it avoided the decade-long entanglement of nation-building.
His critique of coin was based on the history of counterinsurgency, which often leads to the balloon effect. Let's elaborate on that for the listener.
Yeah, the balloon effect is the idea that when you apply pressure in one place, say Afghanistan, the terrorist elements don't just disappear. They bulge out and pop up somewhere else, like Yemen, Somalia, or West Africa.
Right.
So Biden argued the fundamental premise of COIN was flawed because al-Qaeda was a global franchise, not just an Afghan problem. Furthermore, he noted that historically, successful COIN campaigns take 7 to 10 years, minimum duration he knew was politically unacceptable to the American public and the new administration.
Biden also offered a more nuanced analysis of the enemy, arguing that the Taliban was not this cohesive enemy force that required total defeat.
That was a crucial distinction. He argued the Taliban was not a monolith of hardcore extremists. He estimated that only 5 to 10% were true committed ideologues. The remaining 70% were simply foot soldiers, illiterate young men fighting for money, local grievances, or simply to get the foreigners out.
So his strategy was different.
His strategy focused on eliminating the hardcore and negotiating with the pragmatic majority, not trying to win their hearts and minds through a massive, prolonged troop presence.
And the ultimate political calculation Biden presented to Obama was a gut check on responsibility. If you don't get Pakistan right, you can't win. And if Obama adopted McChrystal's expansive, full coin-on strategy.
You own this war.
To which Obama, resigned to the reality, replied, I already own it.
He did. But the political reality was that the public had limited patience. If he greenlit a 40,000-troop, decade-long commitment, he risked his entire political agenda and his presidency. So the debate wasn't just about military tactics. It was about political sustainability and presidential legacy.
This intense disagreement inevitably spilled over into serious civil-military friction, creating a hostile atmosphere in Washington. General Jones, the National Security Advisor, privately referred to the White House political team Emanuel, Axelrod, Gibbs, and Dylan as the water bugs.
Or the Politburo.
Or the Politburo.
This analogy just perfectly illustrates the cultural clash.
Yeah.
Jones, representing military protocol and deep strategic planning, viewed the political peers as water bugs, just flitting around the surface, interested only in measuring the short-term political impact of every single decision. They were invoking the president's name constantly. The president wants this. The president needs that result now to give orders. Jones felt deeply undermined by this politically driven clique who prioritized poll numbers and headlines over military strategy.
And the military itself seemed intent on forcing the president's hand publicly. Admiral Mike Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, publicly stated that McChrystal's strategy probably means more forces before Obama had made any decision.
This was the military brass playing hardball. They were using the press to box the commander-in-chief into accepting their preferred outcome. Emanuel and Donilon were livid. They saw this as the military systematically playing him, boxing him in, and challenging civilian supremacy. The tension was already boiling over.
And then, of course, the political equivalent of a lightning strike.
Hmm.
McChrystal's disastrous Rolling Stone interview making disparaging comments about civilian leadership and famously calling General Jones a clown.
That interview confirmed the White House's darkest suspicions. It made the friction public and toxic, solidifying the civilian view that the military was on a search-and-destroy mission aimed at the president.
And subsequent firing.
It was swift and absolute. It became a seismic event, firmly reasserting the principle of civilian control, even if the underlying tensions with the rest of the brass remained.
So by November 2009, the strategic review process had dragged on for months, and Obama was visibly frustrated. He felt he was being manipulated, that he had one option framed as three options, all of which were just variations of the full military request.
He was trapped by the bureaucracy. The generals, operating with a single voice, were effectively funneling him toward the high troop option. He demanded three real options to choose from, which was a sign he knew the game being played.
Right, he saw through it.
He knew they were presenting option A, too high, option B, too low, and option C, just right, which happened to be their preferred option.
This realization forced a necessary compromise in defining the goal itself. Gates and Army Chief Casey intervened, suggesting a fundamental rhetorical shift in the mission.
They agreed the term defeat. The Taliban was just setting an unachievable bar. They argued it was like defeating Hamas. Instead, they redefined the goal as simply to disrupt and degrade the Taliban's capabilities.
That's a massive change.
It's huge. It lowered the expectations for success, providing political cover, while simultaneously giving the military the resources they needed for a limited, time-bound mission.
That rhetorical compromise was immediately followed by a brutal dose of political reality, delivered by the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, retired General Carl Eikenberry.
Eikenberry's intervention, delivered via video conference, was highly credible because he was a general himself, challenging his former peers. He stated bluntly that the U.S. was severely hindered by Karzai's weakness and corruption, calling the government extraordinarily corrupt. And crucially, he argued that Afghans believed the U.S. was there because we have to be there, meaning the U.S. was committed regardless of Karzai's behavior. This lack of leverage meant Afghans didn't feel they needed to heed U.S. demands about governance.
Eikenberry's point fundamentally destabilized the Koyan premise. If the partner government is corrupt and lacks legitimacy, more U.S. troops just means more targets and a longer occupation.
It was the necessary civilian check on military exuberance. It forced the White House to acknowledge that troop numbers can't fix a corrupt partner or a dysfunctional political system.
And we see the military's inflexibility peak when Vice Chairman General Cartwright, at Biden's request, developed a hybrid option for 20,000 troops focused solely on CT and training.
This was the fight for the soul of the strategy. Admiral Mullen fiercely opposed the hybrid option, which represented Biden's CT+ vision, and he literally barred it from leaving the Pentagon.
He just shut it down.
Shut it down. He wanted a unified front demanding the full Koine resource package.
But Cartwright, invoking his duty to provide independent military advice as a member of the Joint Chiefs, circumvented Mullen. That must have been an explosive moment of internal military conflict.
Oh, it was a massive, unprecedented breach in the JCS hierarchy. The relationship became extremely tense. But Cartwright presented the option directly to the civilians, ensuring that a viable, non-coin option was on the table, fulfilling the president's demand for three real options.
So when Mullen was finally forced to present the full list of options, Obama realized the military had played a trick. The realistic options, McChrystal's 40,000 and Gates's 30 to 35,000, were essentially the same.
Obama pushed back. He pointed out that the lower number was simply the full 40,000 request, with the last brigade held in abeyance for a year.
Just delayed.
And Mullen was forced to concede, well, yes, sir, I didn't see any other path. The generals were just determined to secure the full troop level, minimizing presidential choice.
This led to Obama's firm assertion of authority, defined by two crucial decisions: the hard cap and the exit strategy. First, the hard cap on troops.
Obama flatly decided on 30,000 as a hard cap. This immediately triggered bureaucratic maneuvering. The Pentagon tried to slip in an overlooked request for 4,500 additional enablers. Logistics, medical, communications personnel, which would have pushed the total right back up to nearly 40,000, achieving the military's goal through semantic tricks.
And this is where Obama, finished with the political games, finally erupted. That specific detail of bureaucratic maneuvering is so instructive. Why are enablers such a common tool for inflating troop numbers?
It's classic budget padding. In military operations, enablers are often essential non-combat support roles. By separating them from the combat brigade count, the military can claim a lower combat troop number while secretly getting the necessary logistical footprint for the higher-end strategy.
It's bureaucratic misdirection.
It is, and Obama understood this was an attempt to subvert his explicit order. He erupted, saying, "I'm done doing this. I don't want enablers to be used as wiggle room." And he stepped to the 30,000.
Second, and perhaps the most important strategic lever he pulled, was insisting on a firm public timeline.
He insisted on a July 2011 deadline to begin transferring security responsibility. This was the exit ramp the COIN advocates despised. COIN demands patience and open-ended commitment. A firm deadline means the military must focus on training and handing over responsibility, not endlessly building schools.
It's forced the mission to shift.
Immediately to transition.
Leading up to the final decision, Obama called Colin Powell for advice, seeking counsel from a commander who understood both military logistics and political reality.
And Powell told him exactly what he needed to hear to face down the JCS. He said, "You don't have to put up with this. There are other generals. There's only one commander-in-chief."
Right.
Armed with this confidence, Obama dictated precise, legalistic term sheet orders explicitly stating this approach is not fully resourced counterinsurgency or nation-building.
So after all the internal negotiation, who actually won? Was it Biden and the CT Plus advocates or Petraeus and the COIN proponents?
It was a classic Washington scenario where both sides declared victory. The civilian view, led by Biden and Donilon, believed Obama had prevailed, that he had put a stake in the heart of expansive counterinsurgency by imposing the hard cap and the exit timeline.
But Petraeus and the military leadership saw the decision as a massive win, too. How could they interpret 30,000 troops and a timeline as a victory?
Petraeus argued the core of the decision was 30,000 troops for population protection, the key ingredient of COIN. He believed the limiting language was just political window dressing, allowing the president to save face and satisfy his civilian base. And crucially, Petraeus knew McChrystal could easily find the extra 10,000 troops he needed from NATO allies, effectively reaching the full COIN resource package without the U.S. having to bear the entire cost or political blame.
And there was a critical under-the-radar special operations strategy that gave the military effective leverage, regardless of the COIN-CT debate.
This was the hidden hand of JSOC. Vice Admiral Bill McRaven, McChrystal's successor at the Joint Special Operations Command, had dramatically improved the effectiveness of targeted strikes. The jackpot rate, the frequency of strikes hitting intended targets, jumped from 35% to 80%.
That's a huge jump.
It's a massive jump. And the 18 months until July 2011 would allow special operations teams to decimate the Taliban insurgency, perhaps giving new kinetic meaning to the word degrade.
Yet despite all the meticulous planning and the carefully constructed compromise, General Lute had a final sobering warning for the president, framing the entire strategy not as a calculation, but as a gamble.
Lute outlined the four primary interlinked risks: the Pakistan sanctuary problem, the Afghan governance and corruption problem, the capacity of the Afghan security forces, and the fragility of international support. And Lute warned Obama that these risks were cumulative. They reinforced each other.
So when you look at it all together,
When you view it as a composite, the strategy was less a calculated risk with quantifiable outcomes and more a gamble.
as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear Obama chose this precarious middle path, providing the necessary military resources to reverse momentum while establishing a firm political timeline. He was trying to balance military advice with political sustainability. The conflict in Afghanistan became the war he had to win to give himself the political space to tackle every other issue.
And the entire strategic review exposed a brutal, unfixable truth. The war in Afghanistan could not be fixed solely on the battlefield. Success was intrinsically tied to the pervasive corruption in Kabul and the intractable, untouchable enemy safe havens in Pakistan problems the U.S. had fundamentally limited tools to solve, especially since Pakistan was hardwired against India and was simply not going to change its half-century-old strategic behavior for American demands.
Mm.
The president's operational goal was never perfection, but rather to create the space for Afghans to stand on their own 2 feet, ensuring that the U.S. combat role eventually ended. Yet those in the know recognized the immense difficulty of fighting a war where the enemy leadership was operating from untouchable sanctuaries right next door,
Yeah.
which effectively rendered the Afghan mission politically and strategically dependent on a country the U.S. just couldn't trust. And that leads to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. Despite the intense, months-long internal negotiation, the commitment of 30,000 troops, and the fierce civil-military friction, military advisors like Derek Harvey warned that the war's ultimate success would only be transient stability.
Just temporary.
Temporary. Destined to eventually revert back to the great game of regional rivalry the moment the U.S. departed. So what does it truly mean for a global superpower to knowingly invest immense blood and treasure into a conflict where the best-case scenario, the absolute measure of victory, is merely a temporary delay of the inevitable return to chaos? That caution about the value of transient stability versus endless commitment is one that echoes far beyond the mountains of AFPAC.